To end poverty, the society must start treating people from disadvantaged backgrounds as full-right citizens." Berdzanishvili, 2022. Conflict theorists have long studied inequality in societies worldwide. Conflict theory discusses that poverty is an integral part of a capitalist society. It is a direct consequence of the inequality inherent in the class system. Berdzanishvili, 2022. This is actually the perfect subject for true classical conflict theory. Karl Marx, the father of this field, talked about how the producers in a capitalist society are constantly and deliberately underpaid to increase profit and maximize labor and thus standards for production. This always results in the people who own the means of production getting ahead and the producers remaining in the same or maybe even worse conditions. To make a long story short, employees are staying poor, and the rich keep getting richer. Marx called this the proletariats. The producers versus the bourgeoisie, the people who owns means of production. Today, conflict theory is a bit different. This explains the wealth gap most accurately in my estimation. Conflict theorists do not believe that stratification benefits society as a whole. In a capitalist system, social mobility is possible but barely manageable. Getting a proper education can help someone born into poverty climb to a higher class. However, in this system many people are getting rich, not wealthy. Wealth is a privilege for a chosen few. Modern conflict theorists share the same sentiments in their writings, only they look at globalization as the force that the proletariats, our economy, is up against. Society is what is being shortchanged. C. Wright Mills is regarded as the founder of this discipline and believed there was a conflict in interests between the elite and the others. Examples of the elite would be government and large corporations. G. William Domhoff believes in a similar philosophy as Mills and has written about the power elite of America. LibreTexts, 2020. American companies continually pour finance into overseas suppliers and laborers, taking money away from their homeland. Wages suffer in the U.S. because labor is cheaper in other countries. Private interests also take away tax dollars from U.S. due to businesses taking their plants to foreign lands to produce for a discount. In conclusion, the wealth gap is because of private interests in their minds. Christian worldview on the wealth gap is interesting. Christians believe that there is nothing wrong with wealth itself. It is how we use it that matters. We can use it for good and bad. Wealth is seen as a gift from God. Our money should come from lawful means. Phalange Park High, N.D. Matthew tells us in the New Testament, I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. Matthew chapter 19 verse 24 ESV. So one that hoards his wealth is looked down upon. It is also written, says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 9, NIV. Christians are usually concerned with things like the distribution of goods to people in the world, even going as far as to create humanitarian missions to serve underprivileged places, providing clean water and food. In John we read, if anyone has material possessions and sees his brother in need, how can the love of God be in him? 1 John chapter 3 verse 17. This being said, a hoarder of wealth is a sinner in their eyes. Greed is something looked down upon in the faith and a supposed reason for much poverty and inequality in the world. Christians usually think poverty is a terrible thing, and even the poor ones in my church communities throw in a bit into the offering plate. Christ taught us that treating anyone less than decent because of their circumstances is wrong. In Romans it is written, "For God shows no partiality." Romans chapter 2 verse 11 ESV. Many times in the Bible God and Christ show us that inequality is a sin, from the Moses story of slave liberating to the story of almsgiving. Therefore when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have glory of men. Matthew chapter 6 verses 2 to 5. KJV. Jesus spoke in the Gospel of John, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you." John chapter 15 verse 12 ESV. And it is written in Proverbs, "The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all." Proverbs chapter 22 verse 2 ESV. Followers of Christ believe that if we all pitch in, we can make the world a better place. My church even has a Bishop's Storehouse where struggling members can volunteer a couple of hours for a bit of food. These are a people that believe the woes of inequality can be alleviated by humanitarian efforts and conversion of the people in the world to church groups to strengthen and care after one another. How the world works is a mystery that anyone seeking to live the best possible life they can live is after. The three theoretical frameworks talked about earlier in this selection each have their own way of looking at the world. There are certain presuppositions that each framework must make to stay consistent in the way they examine the world around us. This is ultimately how they believe the world works. The basic assumption of functionalism is that all structures, particularly institutions within society, serve a purpose or function, contributing the stability of the social system. APA, 2013, functionalism starts with this assumption to further investigate society. This theory works from our microsystems to our encounters with our friends and strangers on the street, to our macrosystems where laws and legislation that affects how individuals and companies may behave. Not only mezzo-level things like schools, local organizations, and the intuitions. They believe that everything affects everything. Symbolic interactionism has four main assumptions. 1. Individuals act in reference to the subjective meaning objects have for them. For example, an individual that sees the object of family as being relatively unimportant will make decisions that de-emphasize the role of family in their lives. Nickerson, 2021. This is pretty straightforward. People act on what they believe. 2. Interactions happen in a social and cultural context where objects, people, and situations must be defined and characterized according to individuals' subjective meanings. Nickerson, 2021. People are put in situations where their brain must conjure up a meaningful image for each person, situation, object, etc. 3. For individuals, meanings originate from interactions with other individuals and with society. Nickerson, 2021. Views are developed through our daily interactions. 4. These meanings that an individual has are created and recreated through a process of interpretation that happens whenever that individual interacts with others. And quote, Nickerson, 2021. Every time a person interacts with another person, a process of interpretation takes place that creates and reconstructs the meanings that person has created. I like to say interactionists think of us as almost computers. We have to use our memory like computers do. We store all of these beliefs of the world around us deep inside like a computer does with its ROM. Then when a situation arises that we need to ID, we pull up our memory of it like a computer does with its RAM. This theory believes we create the world by perpetuating societies. Conflict theory assumes there is a cycle that happens in most societies. And quote, conflict theory has 4 primary assumptions that are helpful to understand competition, revolution, structural inequality, and war. And quote, Hayes, 2022. They believe that 2 entities fight for power at first. Then a major event takes place that changes how the environment works. Then the entity in control changes constructs to mitigate revolutionary changes in an environment that they currently control. Then the inevitable war against or brought on by the oppressed party. They believe change is brought upon by these clashes.